The first time I drove Lauren home, the smell of warm vinyl and dust filled the cab of my '94 Chevy S10. We just left a Friday night game at Coconino High, the air still buzzing with the thump of the marching band and the low chatter of kids spilling into the parking lot. My palms clung to the steering wheel, slick with a mix of sweat and the greasy residue from the concession stand popcorn wood split. She sat angled toward me, one leg tucked under the other, her red Chuck Taylors bouncing in time with whatever was playing on KFLX, some early 2000s alt-rock track I pretended to know the words to. Lauren always caught me bluffing. "You don't even like this band," she said, grinning like she'd caught me stealing. "I do," I lied, glancing sideways. "They're just better live." Her laugh was sharp and short, but it stayed in the cab like the scent of a strawberry chapstick. Out the cracked window, the desert night smelled faintly of creosote, the kind of damp that only comes after a storm. It had rained earlier, that quick Arizona monsoon that turns parking lots into shimmering mirrors, and now the asphalt steamed under the glow of streetlights. We passed the old Galaxy Diner on Route 66, its neon sign flickering between pink and blue. My eyes lingered on it a second too long, and the truck's tires hummed against the rumble strip before I corrected. Lauren didn't comment. She just reached for the dash, her hand brushing mine as she turned down the volume. "You ever think about just leaving?" she asked suddenly. "Flagstaff." I stalled, pretending to focus on shifting into third. "Yeah, this town, Arizona, all of it." I shrugged. "Where would you even go?" "Anywhere there's an ocean," she said, staring out at the dark pines flashing past the headlights. "I think I'd like to live by water, the kind you can smell before you see it." We stopped at a red light near LaRue Street, the wet pavement reflecting the signal like molten glass. She fiddled with something in her palm, a small, square-cut piece of leather with a brass ring. "What's that?" I asked. "Found it in my brother's junk drawer," she said. "Guess it used to be a keychain, but the stitching's all worn out." She held it up, the brass ring catching the light. "Figured you could use it for your truck keys." I took it from her, the leather warm from her hand. It smelled faintly of motor oil and something sweet, maybe her lotion. "Thanks," I said, tucking it into my pocket like it was worth more than my whole paycheck from the garage. The light turned green, and I didn't notice the honk from behind us until Lauren reached over and tapped the horn for me, her laugh filling the cab again. When we pulled into her driveway, the rain started again, soft at first, then heavy enough to make the gutters overflow. She didn't get out right away. We sat in the idling truck, wipers thumping back and forth, the keychain still warm in my pocket. "You gonna walk me up, Miller, or just sit there like a creep?" she teased, but there was no bite to it. I killed the engine, grabbed my jacket, and followed her up the cracked concrete path. Her porch light buzzed and swarmed with moths, their wings flashing white in the yellow glow. "Thanks for the ride," she said, already halfway inside. Then she turned back. "Keep the keychain. Maybe it'll remind you there's more out there than busted carburetors." Before I could answer, she closed the door. I stood there a second longer, the rain soaking through my jacket, before heading back to the truck. That little square of leather felt heavier than my whole key ring. I didn't know it then, but I'd end up carrying it, and her voice, for the next 19 years. By the time I saw her again, 19 years had passed, and the leather keychain was the only thing between us that hadn't aged. The stitching was frayed to threads now, the leather darkened and soft from years in my pocket. Some days I forgot it was there. Other days, like this one, I'd find myself turning it over in my hand while waiting for my coffee at Miss Zip's on Route 66, wondering if she still lived anywhere near an ocean. It was late July, that thick part of Arizona summer when the air feels like it's holding its breath before a monsoon breaks. I was headed back from a job in Holbrook, a busted alternator on a long-haul trucker's Peterbilt, when my gas light blinked on just outside of Winslow. I pulled into a little Chevron that had been there since the '70s, the kind with sun-bleached Coke signs and a single row of pumps under a metal awning rattling in the wind. The storm hit as I stepped out of the cab. First, a wall of hot wind, then the rain. Fat drops that smacked the pavement so hard they bounced. The smell of wet asphalt and creosote rose instantly, that intoxicating desert scent that makes you forget for a second that everything here can kill you if you're not careful. I was topping off the tank when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Someone stepping out of a silver Subaru at the next pump. Brown hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, a blue scrub darkening under the rain. She looked up. For a second, my brain did that weird split-screen thing. The 17-year-old in red chucks sitting in my Chevy, and the woman standing 20 feet away with a posture that said she'd been on her feet for 12 hours. "Evan!" she called over the rain. The sound of my name in her voice made my chest tighten, like I'd been holding my breath since 2004, and just remembered to exhale. "Lauren," I said, and it came out half a laugh, half a question. We met halfway between our pumps, the rain plastering her ponytail to her neck. Up close, I could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the faint sunspots on her cheekbones. Not flaws, just the kind of detail you earn by living. "What are you? I thought you." I started. "Lived by the ocean?" She finished for me, grinning through the rain. "I did. Oregon. Then, Texas. Now, travel nurse gigs. Got an assignment at Flagstaff Medical for the summer." That's... I couldn't find the right word. "Unexpected?" she offered. "Yeah," I said. "Good unexpected." The rain was running in rivulets off the awning, dripping onto our shoulders. Behind her, the Subaru's rear window was plastered with stickers. A faded, empty hood one, a Route 66 sign, a tiny blue wave. "You still got the truck?" she asked, eyes scanning the lot. "Nah," I said. "Sold it to a kid heading to college." But I reached into my jeans and pulled out the leather keychain. The brass ring was dull now, the stitching barely holding. Her eyes widened, and she reached out like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to touch it. "You kept it," she said softly. "Guess I'm sentimental," I shrugged. "Or just bad at getting rid of things." For a moment, neither of us said anything. The rain had softened, the air cooler now, carrying that faint metallic tang you only get after a monsoon. Somewhere behind us, a diesel engine rumbled to life. "You got time to grab a coffee?" she asked suddenly, almost too casually. I hesitated. I was sweaty from the drive, smelled faintly of motor oil, and I knew if I said yes, I was stepping into something I hadn't let myself think about in years. "Yeah," I said finally. "I've got time." We ended up at a little diner just down the road, the kind with cracked vinyl booths, and a waitress who called everyone honorable. Lauren sat across from me, cupping her mug with both hands like she was cold even in the July heat. She told me about the years in Oregon, rain, coastal fog, learning to love black coffee. About Texas, the suffocating humidity, the nights driving out to Galveston just to hear the waves. About the pandemic, which she skipped over in broad strokes, but I could hear the weight in her voice. I told her about the shop, how I'd taken over after the old owner retired, how I still sketched cars in a beat-up notebook when business was slow. Somewhere between the refill of her coffee and the arrival of my chicken fried steak, I realized my hands were still wrapped around the keychain in my lap. "You ever think about..." She started, then trailed off. "About what?" I asked. She shook her head, smiling like she'd caught herself saying too much. "Never mind." When we finally stepped back into the humid parking lot, the storm had passed, leaving the asphalt steaming under the sun. She walked me to my truck, her hand brushing mine once, just enough to make my chest ache with something I didn't have a name for anymore. "See you around, Miller," she said, and the way she said it made it sound like a promise and a warning at the same time. 6 weeks later, the summer storms had shifted into that late August pattern. Mornings so dry the pine needles crunched underfoot. Afternoons exploding with thunder that rattled the window glass at the shop. Lauren had been in town long enough for the novelty to fade, but not long enough for her to feel like she belonged here again. We'd run into each other twice more, once at the Safeway on Cedar, where she was juggling a basket of groceries, and I ended up carrying them to her car. Another time at late for the train coffee, when she spotted me from across the patio and waved like we'd been doing this forever. This time, though, she called. It was a Tuesday, just after I'd locked up for the night. The phone buzzed in my back pocket while I was wiping my hands with a shop rag. "Hey, Miller," she said, her voice warm in that way that made the rest of the street noise disappear. "You busy?" "Define busy," I said, tossing the rag onto the workbench. "Not so busy you couldn't meet me at Lowell Observatory in, say, 20 minutes. The observatory sat on Mars Hill, its white dome visible from most of town. We'd gone once on a school trip sophomore year, both of us pretending to be interested in telescopes, while making up stories about what aliens would think of Flagstaff. "Sure," I said, without thinking about what that meant. The air on Mars Hill was cooler than in town, thick with the smell of ponderosa pines warming under the last light of the day. Lauren was leaning against the hood of her Subaru, wearing a gray hoodie with the sleeves pushed up and jeans dark from the knees down. She must have been caught in a sudden shower on the drive up. "Wasn't sure you'd come," she said as I walked up. "Wasn't sure you'd ask," I replied. She smiled, small and quick. "Come on, there's something I want to show you." Inside, the place was quiet, just a handful of tourists drifting between exhibits. We ended up on the outdoor deck, where the sky was sliding from cobalt to deep indigo. The San Francisco peaks loomed dark against the horizon, their ridgelines still catching the last smear of orange. She leaned on the railing close enough that I caught the faint scent of her shampoo, clean and sharp like green apples. "I missed this," she said. "What? The mountains?" "The quiet, the way the air smells here after rain. The fact that people don't honk at you if you take an extra second at a green light." She glanced at me, and I knew she was thinking about that night in the truck. For a moment, it felt like we were back there, 17, with everything ahead of us. Then she looked away, and I saw the faint crease between her brows, the one that hadn't been there before. "You ever regret not leaving?" she asked. I thought about the shop, the guys I'd worked alongside since high school, the way Route 66 felt like it ran through my bones. I also thought about every time I'd wondered where she was, and why she hadn't stayed. "Some days," I admitted, "but most days I figure there's worse places to be stuck." She laughed softly, then pulled something from her pocket. My breath caught when I saw it, the leather keychain, mine, resting in her palm. "You dropped this," she said. I frowned. "When?" "Last week at the coffee shop. I picked it up, figured you'd come by for it, but—" She trailed off, then handed it back. Our fingers brushed, and something passed between us. Not electricity, not exactly, but a warmth that made me want to stay there on that deck until the stars burned out. We stayed until the sky went black and the Milky Way spilled overhead. When we walked back to the parking lot, she stopped by her car and turned toward me. "I've got a couple more weeks before my next assignment," she said. "Thought maybe we could do something. Take a drive. Like old times." Like old times hit harder than I expected. I nodded, my throat dry. "Yeah, I'd like that." "Yeah, cheers are all right." That Friday, we took off towards Sedona, windows down, the smell of red dust and juniper filling the cab. We hiked to a ridge where the rocks glowed like embers in the evening sun, and she told me stories about the places she'd been. Places with green water and white sand, places with city lights so bright you couldn't see the stars. I didn't tell her that I'd imagined seeing those places with her, back before I even knew where they were on a map. I just listened, my thumb tracing the worn edges of the keychain in my pocket. When I dropped her off that night, she lingered at the door of her apartment, her hand resting on the frame like she wasn't ready to go inside. "You ever think about what would have happened if we'd?" she began, then shook her head. "Never mind," but I knew exactly what she meant. And I also knew we were heading straight toward the answer, whether we admitted it or not. By late November, Flagstaff had traded the summer storms for brittle cold, and the smell of wood smoke curling out of chimneys. The first dusting of snow had hit the peaks, and the shop's parking lot crunched under my boots in the morning. Lauren's Subaru had been in twice that month, once for an oil change, once because she'd run over a nail on Milton Road. Both times she'd lingered at the counter, sipping burnt coffee from the machine in the corner, both of us pretending this was just another customer interaction. But the clock was ticking. Her travel nurse contract ended the Friday after Thanksgiving. She'd already been offered another assignment in San Diego, and from the way she talked about the ocean breeze and the year-round mild weather, I could tell she'd accepted in her head even if she hadn't signed the papers yet. We hadn't talked about it directly. That was our style, circling the hard things like wary dogs. But the closer her departure got, the heavier the air between us felt. The Tuesday before Thanksgiving, she called. "You got plans this weekend?" she asked, her voice too light. "Just the usual family thing," I said. "Why?" "I was thinking—" She paused, and I could hear the faint hum of traffic in the background. "Let's take that drive. Like we said, one more time before I go." The next morning, we left before sunrise. My breath puffed white in the cold as I tossed a thermos of coffee into the passenger seat. She climbed in, wrapped in a thick gray scarf, her hair pulled low under a knit beanie. The air in the cab smelled faintly of cedar from the air freshener I'd hung last week, and of her perfume. So warm, something I'd come to recognize even before I saw her. We headed north on 89. The desert spread wide and empty under a pale pink sky. The leather keychain dangled from the ignition, swinging slightly every time I hit a bump. She'd brought an old CD wallet from her car, and soon the shins were playing through the speakers. Songs we used to listen to in the Chevy, back when we thought lyrics could explain our whole lives. "Feels like we're 17 again," she said, watching the road ahead. "Except I've got more back pain," I said, and she laughed, the sound pushing some of the tightness out of my chest. We stopped in Cameron for fry bread, the wind snapping cold across the parking lot. She tucked herself into my side as we walked back to the truck, like it was the most natural thing in the world. My hand rested against her back without thinking about it, my palm warming through the knit of her sweater. By the time we reached the Grand Canyon, the sky had clouded over, the light turning silver on the rock walls. We stood at the south rim, side by side, the wind lifting strands of her hair into my face. I could smell the faint salt from her chapstick. "It's strange," she said after a while, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "I've seen so many places, but I don't think any of them feel like this. Like home?" I asked. She nodded, eyes still on the horizon. I wanted to say, "Then stay." I wanted to tell her that she didn't have to chase the ocean anymore, that she could plant herself here, and I'd make sure she never regretted it. But I didn't. Instead, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the keychain. She glanced at it, then at me. "You've been carrying that thing for almost 20 years, she said, half smiling. "Maybe it's time it went back to you," I said, pressing it into her hand. Her fingers closed around it slowly, like it might break. "Evan," she started, but stopped. The wind was cold enough to make my ears ache, but I barely felt it. We didn't say much on the drive back. The clouds thickened, and by the time we rolled into Flagstaff, fat snowflakes were drifting down, catching in the headlights. I walked her to her apartment door, and for the first time since we'd reconnected, she didn't linger there. "Thanks for today," she said softly. It meant a lot. Then she stepped inside, and I stood there for a long minute, watching the snow build on the welcome mat. 3 days later, I got a text just after midnight. Made it to San Diego. The ocean smells just like I remembered. I stared at it for a long time, my hand in my pocket, fingers curling around nothing where the keychain used to be. Part 5. By April, the snow was long gone, replaced by that brittle spring dryness where pine pollen coated every windshield in town. Business at the shop was steady, busted belts from winter cold snaps, tourists breaking down on their way to the canyon. I'd gotten good at keeping my head down, filling my days with the rhythm of repairs, the metallic smell of brake dust, the whine of air tools. Lauren was gone. Not just physically, gone in the way someone disappears from your daily mental landscape when you know they're living a different life entirely. We'd texted a few times after she left San Diego, her sending me a picture of the ocean at sunset, me replying with a blurry photo of Humphreys Peak dusted with snow. But those exchanges had thinned out like weak radio static. Then, on a Tuesday morning in mid-April, she walked into the shop. The bell over the door jingled, and I looked up from the counter expecting a parts delivery. Instead, there she was. Hair shorter now, sun-kissed, wearing a faded denim jacket over a white dress. In her right hand, swinging gently, was the leather keychain. "Hey, Miller," she said, smiling in that slow, careful way that made me wonder how long she'd rehearsed it. For a second, all I could do was take in the details, the salt-warmed scent of her skin as she stepped closer, the faint click of the brass ring against her keys, the way her eyes seemed both lighter and heavier than the last time I'd seen them. "You're back," I said stupidly. "Just for a day," she replied. "Passing through on my way to Denver, but I thought I'd stop in." She placed the keychain on the counter between us. The leather was darker than when I'd given it to her, the stitching nearly gone. But it was clean, oiled, cared for. "You kept it," I said, though I already knew the answer. "Couldn't get rid of it," she said. "Guess I'm sentimental, too." We ended up walking to Miss Zipp's for coffee, just like old times. The place smelled of frying bacon and cheap diner soap, the vinyl booths patched with duct tape. We talked about nothing. The drive from San Diego, the early heat creeping into the desert, the way Flagstaff's downtown seemed to sprout a new brewery every time she left. But under it, I felt the clock ticking. This was just a pause, a snapshot before she kept moving. Halfway through her second cup, she reached into her jacket and slid the keychain across the table toward me. "I think it belongs here," she said. I didn't touch it right away. "You sure?" She nodded. "Some things, they don't fit in your pocket anymore, but they can still stay where they matter." Nayas Janos. I closed my hand around it, the leather warm from her palm. For a moment, we just sat there, the hum of the diner filling the space between us. When we walked back to the shop, she hugged me at the corner of Route 66 and San Francisco Street. It wasn't the quick, polite kind. It was slow, her arms firm around me, her face pressed just under my jaw. I could feel her breath warm on my neck, smell the faint trace of her shampoo. "Take care of yourself, Milla," she said, stepping back. "You too," I managed. I watched her cross the street, her denim jacket catching the wind, until the traffic swallowed her up. Then I slipped the keychain back into my pocket, the brass ring clinking against my truck keys. It was heavier now, but not in a way that pulled me down. More like an anchor, not to hold me in place, but to remind me where I'd been. That night, I sat on the tailgate of my truck outside the shop, the sky washed in desert stars. I turned the keychain over in my hands, feeling every nick, every soft edge worn in over 2 decades. First loves don't fade the way people think. They just change shape, from something you're holding on to something that holds on to you. And sometimes, that's enough.